Hello and welcome to Black History Matters 2025. In today's episode, we're diving into the history of the Boston Vigilance Committee, a crucial organization in the fight against slavery and protecting fugitive enslaved people in the 19th century. We'll explore the historical moment that gave rise to this resistance group, the key figures behind it, and its impact on the broader abolitionist movement. The historical moment. To understand why the Boston Vigilance Committee was created, we need to look at the escalating tensions in the United States over slavery in the mid 19th century. By the 1830s and 1840s, abolitionist sentiment was growing in the northern United States. As we mentioned earlier in this series, many northern states had already abolished slavery by this period, such as New York State, which ended slavery in 1827. Part of the reason this was possible, by which I mean the complete upending of the economic system reliant on slavery in the North, was the arrival of the Industrial Revolution in the United States in about the late 18th century and early 19th century. The impact of the Industrial Revolution was felt more strongly in the northern United States, where cities like Boston, New York, Baltimore, and Philadelphia saw an increasing reliance on jobs revolving around industrialization, such as factory work. The rise of industrialization made the North less dependent on enslaved labor, and they also began to see the system of slavery as cruel to fellow human beings and providing an unfair economic advantage to the South. Abolitionist movements, fueled by newspapers, religious groups, and formerly enslaved individuals' testimonials about their experiences under slavery, highlighted the moral and legal contradictions of slavery, shifting the public's perception of slavery in the North at least. After all, this was an era in which print materials, such as John Brown Russwurm and Samuel E. Cornish's Freedom's Journal, Frederick Douglass's North Star, and William Lloyd Garrison's The Liberator, all of these newspapers, which we covered in the previous video, were bringing mass attention to the cruelties of slavery. Print material could articulate information and circulate it in mass. Creating print materials with an explicitly abolitionist bent led to this shift in public opinion. Likewise, the bend in public opinion against slavery that we see in this period was furthered by the publication of best-selling books. Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852 by Harriet Beecher Stowe, depicted the brutal realities of slavery through the story of Tom, a deeply religious enslaved man who endures immense suffering at the hands of his cruel enslaver, who in the book is named Simon Legree. The novel exposed the inhumanity of slavery to northern readers, portraying the separation of families, physical abuse, and moral contradictions within a so-called Christian society that put up with slavery. Its emotional storytelling stirred widespread outrage, making Harriet Beecher Stowe a household name. While Uncle Tom's Cabin was fiction, books documenting the experience of the formerly enslaved were also gaining increasing popularity in this period. For example, although published a decade or so from the time period that we are currently talking about, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs is a first-hand account of the life of an enslaved woman named Harriet Jacobs. The text highlights the unique struggles Black women faced under slavery, including sexual exploitation by their white male masters. Jacobs details her harrowing escape from slavery, including hiding in a tiny attic for 7 years, and ultimately appeals to Northern women to recognize the moral urgency of abolition. Books within this genre were widely consumed by the North in this era. Many Southerners reacted angrily to Uncle Tom's Cabin and similar abolitionist works, dismissing them as exaggerated or misleading propaganda designed to undermine their way of life. Pro-slavery advocates argued that the novel misrepresented slavery, claiming that enslaved people were treated well and the abolitionists were spreading dangerous, divisive lies to incite rebellion and disrupt the Southern economy. All of this, in addition to conflicts over the expansion of slavery into new territories, as the United States continued to expand, deepened national divisions. This tension between the North and the South would come to a head with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act. A key turning point came in 1850 with the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act, part of the Compromise of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 was a series of laws aimed at easing tensions between free and slave states following the U.S. acquisition of new territory after the Mexican-American War. It admitted California as a free state, strengthened the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, allowed popular sovereignty to decide slavery in Utah and New Mexico, abolished the slave trade in Washington, D.C., and settled Texas's border disputes. Overall, it was meant to ease tensions in the battle over whether incoming states would be free or slave states. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was a particularly controversial part of the compromise. It was building on an existing law called the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 was a federal law that allowed enslavers and their agents to capture and return escaped enslaved people from free states, while also imposing penalties on anyone who aided fugitives. However, it lacked strong enforcement mechanisms, and many northern states resisted it by passing personal liberty laws to protect escaped enslaved individuals. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 strengthened the original law by requiring all citizens, including those in free states, to assist in the capture of fugitive enslaved people and imposed harsh penalties on those who helped them escape. It also denied fugitives the right to a jury trial or to testify in their own defense, making it easier for free black individuals to be falsely captured and enslaved by being transferred out of the North, essentially being kidnapped. This law greatly increased tensions between the North and South, fueling resistance efforts like the Underground Railroad. Because this law required that escaped enslaved individuals be returned to their enslavers, even if they had reached free states like Massachusetts, it felt like an imposition to many Northerners that required action. Boston itself had been, for a very long time, a center of anti-slavery activism. Boston had already seen high-profile incidents where enslaved people sought freedom and abolitionists mobilized to protect them. For example, one notable case included the story of George Latimer in 1842, who was targeted under the fugitive slave laws but was ultimately aided by abolitionist networks. In 1842, George Latimer, an escaped enslaved man from Virginia, was arrested in Boston under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, sparking widespread protest. Abolitionists led by the likes of important public figures like Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison launched a legal and public pressure campaign that ultimately led to Latimer's freedom after his enslaver accepted a ransom. This event and others like it underscored the urgent need for an organized system of resistance, hence the birth of the Boston Vigilance Committee. The Committee. The Boston Vigilance Committee was established in October 1850 in response to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, answering the call set forth by Boston's black community at the African Meeting House earlier that month. The African Meeting House, built in 1806 in Boston, was the first black church in the city and became a central hub for the black American community. It served as a meeting place for religious services, education, and political activism, particularly in the fight against slavery. Throughout the 19th century, it hosted abolitionist speeches, including those by Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison, and played a crucial role in the organizing of resistance to pro-slavery laws like the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The Declaration of Sentiments of the Colored Citizens of Boston on the Fugitive Slave Bill was a powerful public statement issued in October of 1850 at the African Meeting House. In it, Boston's black community called on the city's residents to take a stand against the law, declaring that their fate depended on whether or not Bostonians would support liberty or comply with the federal mandate dictated by the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 that demanded of them to return escaped enslaved individuals. The declaration urged immediate action and resistance, hence leading to the creation of the Boston Vigilance Committee. In response to the declaration, Bostonians gathered at Faneuil Hall, located in the heart of Boston, where they formed their third and final version of the Vigilance Committee, continuing earlier efforts and earlier versions of the Vigilance Committee to help safeguard the safety of their black neighbors, whether they were freed, born free, enslaved, or otherwise. The committee, which grew to eventually include 200 members, was dedicated to aiding freedom seekers escaping slavery through the Underground Railroad. Members provided shelter, clothing, money, and safe passage, ensuring that those seeking freedom had the resources and protections they needed. Their work reflected the urgent question posed in their founding moment, whether Bostonians would stand on the side of liberty or slavery. Central figures in the movement were both white and black, demonstrating an interracial group in solidarity with aiding freedom seekers. A central figure in this committee was Theodore Parker, a Unitarian minister and radical abolitionist. He was deeply involved in the Underground Railroad and provided shelter for fugitives in his own home. He was known for his fiery sermons that often preached against slavery. A prominent intellectual and reformer, he was deeply influenced by Ralph Waldo Emerson, a transcendentalist. Parker was a co-founder of the Boston Vigilance Committee in 1850. He was directly involved in aiding fugitives, including Ellen and William Craft, and publicly defended those who defied federal law to protect escaped enslaved people. His outspoken abolitionism and use of his pulpit to denounce slavery as a moral evil made him highly detested by some. Still, Parker's writings and speeches, particularly his belief in the moral duty of civil disobedience, would later go on to influence figures like Martin Luther King Jr. Despite declining health, he remained committed to the abolitionist cause until his death in 1860. Another key player was Lewis Hayden. Lewis Hayden was a formerly enslaved man, abolitionist, and politician. His work through the Boston Vigilance Committee was one of many activities he undertook to end slavery. Born into slavery in Kentucky, Hayden and his family escaped in 1844, eventually settling in Boston, where he became a leading figure in the abolitionist movement. He operated a safe house on Beacon Hill, using his home as a key stop on the Underground Railroad, and sheltered freedom seekers at the risk of his own safety and freedom. He was known for his militant stance, reportedly keeping barrels of gunpowder in his home and threatening to blow up his house rather than allow fugitives to be captured. His activism extended to public speaking, fundraising, and political engagements. After the Civil War, he continued his advocacy by working in the Massachusetts state government, becoming one of the first black men elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Hayden remained a committed activist until his death in 1889. Impact. The committee became widely known for its daring rescues, including the successful liberation of Shadrach Minkins in 1851, when a group of activists stormed a courthouse and smuggled him to safety in Canada. They also attempted, though unsuccessfully, to rescue Anthony Burns in 1854, whose case galvanized anti-slavery protests across Boston. The case of Minkins is central to understanding the work undertaken by the committee. In 1851, Shadrach Minkins, an escaped enslaved man, was captured in Boston under the stricter Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, as we've mentioned. However, a group of black abolitionists, many which included members of the Boston Vigilance Committee, stormed the courthouse and successfully freed him, helping him escape to Canada via the Underground Railroad. Unfortunately, the case of Anthony Burns played out quite differently. Anthony Burns was an enslaved man from Virginia who escaped to Boston in 1854. However, under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 again, his former enslaver, Charles Suttle, tracked him down and had him arrested. Burns's capture sparked outrage amongst Boston's abolitionist community, leading the Boston Vigilance Committee to organize a dramatic rescue attempt on May 26, 1854. Abolitionists, including Thomas Wentworth Higginson and Lewis Hayden, gathered outside the courthouse where Burns was held and attempted to storm the building. The confrontation turned violent, and a federal marshal was killed in the chaos. Despite their efforts, the rescue attempt failed due to the heavy government reinforcements. President Franklin Pierce sent federal troops to Boston to ensure Burns's return to slavery, and on June 2, 1854, he was forcibly marched through the streets of Boston and sent back to Virginia, a moment that deeply shocked and angered many Northerners. Burns's case became a national rallying cry against the Fugitive Slave Act, further radicalizing the abolitionist movement. However, his freedom was eventually purchased in 1855 by Northern sympathizers, and he later attended Oberlin College before becoming a minister. The failed rescue attempt demonstrated the growing divide between North and South that would eventually lead to the Civil War. Legacy. The Boston Vigilance Committee effectively disbanded around the start of the Civil War in 1861, a little bit earlier, with the war leading to the abolition of slavery and the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. The need for an underground network to protect freedom seekers diminished. By the time the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, formally ending slavery in the U.S., the committee's mission had been fulfilled and it ceased to operate. However, the Boston Vigilance Committee played a crucial role in resisting slavery in a moment of great need, directly defying federal laws that sought to criminalize black freedom. Their actions helped to expose the moral contradictions of the Fugitive Slave Act and fueled Northern opposition to slavery. They also demonstrated that sometimes following the law is not the moral thing to do. This is a valuable lesson for today. In its own era, the committee's work laid the foundation for future abolitionist activism. Similar vigilance committees formed in cities like New York and Philadelphia, providing a blueprint for organized resistance before the end of slavery. Their actions remind us that change often starts with a small group of dedicated individuals willing to stand against oppression. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Black History Matters 2025. Be sure to check out our upcoming videos as we continue to explore overlooked stories from Black history. The next video will be available on Monday, February 10th on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to leave any feedback on this particular video or the program in general, the link on your screen will take you to a survey where you can leave this feedback. You are also more than welcome to contact the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum at the contact info on your screen or to leave a comment in the comments section below. Thank you.